In this episode, we will explore who owns the most expensive airspace in the world by examining the Siberian air corridor. Looking at East Asia, which includes China, Japan, Korea, and Taiwan, and Europe, we see that almost 2.4 billion people live in these two regions. That's 1/3 of the world's population. One of the most impressive facts is that each of these regions has a GDP of $20 trillion. Together, these regions produce half of the world's GDP. We are talking about the two most densely populated and developed regions in the world, where the largest and most important cities are located. There is only one country between these regions, Russia, which, roughly speaking, has the ability to control the connection between Europe and Asia, determining whether passage through its territory is possible. During the Cold War, except for a few non-Soviet airlines, flights over the territory of the USSR were prohibited, which created significant problems for travelers. For example, the quickest route from London to Tokyo at that time started at 10 a.m. on Friday in London and included stops in Rome, Beirut, Bahrain, Karachi, Calcutta, Yangon, Bangkok, and Manila before finally arriving in Tokyo at 6 a.m. on Sunday. To travel from one city to another, which were 10,000 kilometers apart, it was necessary to fly 16,000 kilometers within 30 hours on the fastest jet liner, the Comet. The cheaper flight on a turboprop plane, which departed from London on Sundays, took a tenfold longer time, 88 hours, and arrived in Tokyo only on Thursday. Although this method was highly inefficient, there existed a more successful route through the Arctic. The first airline company to start operating flights through the Arctic was SAS. Initially, this route was used for rapid delivery to the west coast of the USA. The use of this route became possible thanks to the improvement of aircraft navigation systems, which solved the problem of inefficient operation of conventional magnetic compasses in the region of the North Pole. In the 1950s, there was no airplane capable of performing a direct flight to the west coast of the USA. However, the polar route used by the SAS airline allowed for a relatively fast arrival at the destination. The journey included a departure from Copenhagen, a layover in Greenland, a flight to Canada, and an arrival in Los Angeles, which reduced the travel time from 36 to 22 hours. When SAS demonstrated the safety and economic efficiency of using Arctic routes, other airlines quickly followed suit, creating not only flights along the west coast of the United States, but even expanding them to the east. Although the most direct route from London to Tokyo is over Siberia, the airlines were forced to take a different route as the airspace of the Soviet Union was closed to flights. In 1960, just a year after Alaska became one of the northern states of America, the small town of Anchorage, with a population of just 40,000, and its airport, became an unexpectedly critical transportation hub between Europe and Asia. Airlines began operating flights from London to Tokyo 3 times a week, flying from Heathrow Airport at 13:45. After a 9.5-hour flight, they arrived in Anchorage for refueling, then continued the 7-hour flight to Tokyo. The total travel time was only 17 hours, half as much as before. The achievement was huge and comparable to the Concorde supersonic aircraft, which reduced the flight time from London to New York from 6 hours to 3. However, BOAC, which worked on this project, was not the only one. In the 1960s, major European airlines began using Anchorage as a transit airport for flights to East Asia. Airlines that used this airport included Air France, Lufthansa, KLM, IB, Japan National Airlines, and many more. Due to its geographical location, the small town in Alaska has suddenly become one of the largest and busiest international centers, hosting passengers and crews from all over the world. However, the development of aviation technology did not stand still. The range of aircraft continued to increase, and soon there were airlines that could fly from Europe to Asia without stopping in Anchorage. An example of such a company is Finnair, which in 1983 began flying directly from Helsinki to Tokyo via the North Pole, and north of the USSR borders in international airspace. The flight time was reduced to 13 hours. However, most airlines continued to fly with a stopover in Anchorage. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed, and from that moment on, Russia gradually allowed European and Asian airlines to use its airspace. Of course, this didn't happen overnight. At the very least, Russian air traffic controllers had to be taught to speak English in more than one phrase. London is the capital of Great Britain. But once everything was in place, airlines began to rapidly transition to direct, non-stop flights to Asia via Siberia. This led to the fact that Anchorage went out of history. The huge modern international airport, built in 1982 to serve the world's main airlines, was completely empty a few years later. The airport, designed for hundreds of international flights, today serves only a few domestic flights with a time interval of a few days. Meanwhile, Russia, having opened its airspace to airlines flying to Asia over Siberia, successfully earns a lot on this. Airlines, by making direct non-stop flights, thanks to this save a lot of time and money, while Russia actively requires a large fee for this. The exact figure remains a mystery, but it is believed that when flying from Europe to Asia and back, Russia receives a minimum of $100 per passenger. Thanks to Russia's control of the air corridor, the country has gained significant power, which is constantly used to its advantage. The Airways Transit Agreement has been signed by 129 countries and allows airlines to fly through the airspace of other countries. However, Russia has not signed this agreement and has reserved the right to decide which countries can use its airspace for flights and which cannot. As a result of Russia's control of the air corridor, the country is using it as a powerful political tool. In 2014, in response to international sanctions, Russia threatened to close its airspace to European Union airlines. In 2017, Russia threatened to close the airspace to Dutch airlines because Schiphol Airport was reducing the number of flights for one of the Russian airlines. And in 2018, Russia threatened to close airspace to US airlines in response to US military action in Syria. There is an unofficial rule that each European country has only one airline which is allowed to fly over Siberia. However, there are exceptions. For example, British Airways and Virgin Atlantic are both based in London and both are licensed to fly over Siberia. The only French airline with permission to fly over Siberia is Air France. Lufthansa is the only German airline with a permit for this. Iberia is the only Spanish airline licensed for air travel, and so on. In the past, this was not a big problem as European countries were relatively small and only a few countries had more than one international airline. However, today times are changing and more low-cost airlines are starting to compete directly with traditional airlines on long-haul international routes. Under the current system of permits to fly over Siberia, large traditional airlines have a monopoly on routes to East Asia. For example, SAS operates its flights from Norway, Denmark, and Sweden, while having permission to fly over the airspace of Siberia. As a result, the company flies to destinations such as Tokyo, Beijing, and Shanghai and is the only airline in Scandinavia with this authorization. However, there is another airline in Scandinavia, Norwegian Airlines, Norwegian, which is one of the largest low-cost airlines in the world. Norwegian was the first company to provide low-cost flights on long international routes, mainly from major European cities to US cities. Norwegian has also expressed its intention to expand eastward. For example, it already operates flights from Copenhagen to Bangkok and from London to Singapore. However, these destinations do not require permission to fly over Siberia, as they are further south. Norwegian believes that since SAS does not fly from Norway to East Asia, only Norwegian airlines should be allowed to fly over Siberia. Despite several requests, Norwegian continues to be denied permission to fly through the Siberian air corridor. At the moment, no low-cost airline in the world has permission to fly in the Siberian airspace of Russia. In February 2022, flights over the territory of Russia were finally stopped due to the armed conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Flights were stopped not only for the safety of passengers, but also to put pressure on the Russian leadership to end this conflict as soon as possible. We can only hope that the situation will normalize soon. Perhaps when you watch this video, the conflict has already ended and flights over Siberia have become possible again. Of course, the Russian government will always consider this corridor as a source of income, and high fees make budget flights in this direction unfeasible. Although free competition would bring more benefits to passengers, the current system is not conducive to this. Direct flights to Asia will remain expensive until Russia starts issuing air permits to budget airlines. Nevertheless, the opening of the airspace over Siberia saves passengers huge amounts of money, as well as time and money. Thank you so much for your channel support. If you want to see more awesome stories, then subscribe to the channel and like. And that's all for me. See you all soon.